While the two sisters were swimming, they noticed something strange. A lost diamond ring was lying at the bottom of the pool. Seeing that no one else was around, Mary, the older sister, dove straight into the water to retrieve it. However, the ring was stuck in the drain grid. No matter how hard she tried to pull it out, it wouldn't budge. As Mary stayed underwater for too long without resurfacing, her younger sister Annie quickly dropped her towel and jumped in to help. Despite their combined efforts, the ring, made of tough material, wouldn't move at all. But as they pulled and twisted with force, Annie's hair accidentally got sucked into the drain. Mary panicked at the sight and immediately grabbed Annie's hair, desperately trying to pull her free. No matter how hard she pulled, the hair remained stuck. At the same time, it was already the end of the day, and the swimming pool was about to close. The pool's manager, eager to go home and have dinner with his family, glanced at the water's surface, saw nothing unusual, and promptly shut off the pool controls. The surface cover of the pool began to slowly close. Seeing the cover descending, Mary realized the gravity of the situation. Annie was still trapped underwater. In a frantic effort, Mary gave one final desperate pull and managed to free Annie just in time. The two sisters swam upward with all their strength, racing against the closing cover above them. But by the time they reached the surface, it was too late. The cover had fully closed, sealing them inside the pool. It was then that they fully grasped the severity of their predicament. Earlier, when they had first arrived at the pool, the manager had mentioned that the facility was closed on weekends, and today was Friday. This meant the two sisters would be trapped underwater for 3 days. Realizing how dire their situation was, they began pounding on the pool cover and shouting for help. But no matter how loudly they yelled or how hard they banged, the world above remained completely silent. At this moment, Mary managed to stay calm. She told Annie they needed to focus on finding clues and encouraged her to stay strong and not give up. Sure enough, Annie soon made a discovery. Two sisters were trapped in a swimming pool and the water temperature was dropping rapidly. Mary, the older sister, looked visibly distressed. When her younger sister Annie asked what was wrong, Mary finally admitted that she had been hiding the fact that she had diabetes. As Mary was nearing her breaking point, they suddenly heard a sound near the pool. It turned out to be the janitor working late overtime. For a moment, it seemed like they finally had hope. Once they confirmed the sound was footsteps, the sisters began shouting desperately for help. However, when the janitor realized their situation, her attention shifted to a bag nearby. Quietly, she took Mary's credit card and phone. The sisters, still believing they were about to be rescued, had no idea what was happening. But then the janitor turned her attention to the security cameras. She cautiously walked to the control room and turned off all the surveillance feeds. After that, she returned to the pool and demanded the phone password, claiming she needed it to call for help. The sisters, naively thinking she was a kind-hearted person, immediately gave her the password. That's when the janitor revealed a sinister smile. It turned out she had just been released from prison and was desperate for money. She threatened the sisters, saying she wouldn't help them unless they handed over their bank card PIN. The sisters had jumped into the pool to retrieve a ring, and now their money was at stake. There was no way they were going to give in so easily. Despite the janitor's attempts to persuade them, the sisters refused to cooperate. Frustrated, the janitor decided to teach them a lesson. She turned off the pool lights and the heater, causing the water temperature to plummet even further. At this rate, if the sisters continued resisting, they wouldn't survive the night. Left with no choice, Mary finally revealed the PIN. But the janitor told them it would take time to withdraw the money and that she wouldn't let them go until she had the cash in hand. As the night dragged on, the janitor still hadn't returned from the ATM. The sisters started worrying that she had taken the money and fled. Just as they were trying to figure out another way to save themselves, the janitor reappeared. It turned out she had gone to withdraw the money, only to discover there was just $5 in the account. At this rate, if the sisters continued resisting, they wouldn't survive the night. Left with no choice, Mary finally revealed the PIN. But the janitor told them it would take time to withdraw the money and that she wouldn't let them go until she had the cash in hand. As the night dragged on, the janitor still hadn't returned from the ATM. The sisters started worrying that she had taken the money and fled. Just as they were trying to figure out another way to save themselves, the janitor reappeared. It turned out she had gone to withdraw the money, only to discover there was just $5 in the account. As the woman drove into the forest, the radio suddenly began to emit static, and the next second, her car ran out of gas. When Mary stepped out to check the situation, she realized that the road ahead had completely disappeared. Just as she was about to return to the car, she was horrified to find that the vehicle, which had been right behind her moments ago, had mysteriously vanished. With nightfall approaching, Mary crouched down, feeling utterly lost. At that moment, a large flock of crows suddenly flew overhead, terrifying her. Determined to leave before dark, she decided to hurry out of the area. But then, a growl echoed from behind her. When Mary looked back, a shadowy figure darted past her. Alarmed, she chased after it, eventually coming across a strange house. Suddenly, the door of the house swung open, and an old woman stood in the doorway, shouting at Mary to run if she wanted to stay alive. Without thinking, Mary bolted toward the house, managing to make it inside just in time. Before she could gather her thoughts, the old woman instructed everyone to stand in front of a mirror. She explained to Mary that they were trapped in a cage and that at night, the only safe place was inside the cage. If anyone stayed outside, they would be torn apart by terrifying monsters. The old woman went on to explain that their safety came at a price. They had to stand before the mirror and expose everything about themselves to the monsters outside. Only then would the creatures refrain from attacking. The entire situation was unnerving, and Mary was too frightened to sleep that night. At dawn, she grabbed her parrot and announced that she was going home. The others simply watched in silence, not attempting to stop her. They knew all too well that there was no way out. A short while later, the old woman found Mary standing by a cliff. She explained that the forest was centered around the cage, and there were over 100 markers spread out a few kilometers away. Each marker was a half-day's journey from the cage, meaning that if you stayed within that range, you could return before nightfall. But if you ventured too far, you'd never make it back. Despite the warnings, Mary still hadn't given up on the idea of leaving. The old woman said that in order to survive in this forest, there were 3 rules that must be followed. First, never turn your back on the mirror. Second, never open the door after dark. Third, stay away from the tunnels and always remain in the sunlight. The tunnels, she explained, were the underground holes scattered throughout the forest where the monsters hid during the day. Despite these rules and the mention of unseen monsters, Mary still found everything incredibly strange. So she convinced Jack to accompany her to one of the tunnels. She asked him to lower her down with a rope so she could see what was inside for herself. Before long, Mary descended into the tunnel and found old newspapers and an ancient video camera that had been used by humans. She even discovered a bicycle. She asked Jack to pull the bike up first. However, as Mary waited for Jack to lower the rope again, she noticed a pale arm reaching out from the darkness. Luckily, the arm retreated, seemingly afraid of the sunlight, allowing Mary to escape back to the surface safely. But when the old woman saw the bicycle, she immediately questioned Mary about where it had come from. Mary lied, saying she found it by the roadside. Back at the cabin, Jack managed to repair the video camera that Mary had brought back, hoping it could capture the appearance of the monsters outside. As they anxiously waited, a pair of legs appeared in front of the camera. Anna recognized the voice of the person outside. It was her husband, who had been missing for 6 days. The creature outside was calling for Anna to open the door. Anna wanted to let him in, but the old woman blocked her, reminding her of the rules. Anna insisted that it was her husband pleading for help. The old woman warned her that it was one of the monsters trying to trick her into opening the door. She advised Anna to ask a question that only her husband would know the answer to. Anna asked the person outside to name her favorite book. The man couldn't answer, but kept repeating how much he wanted to see her. Anna then suggested that he show his face to the camera to prove that he was really her husband. If it was him, she would open the door. Slowly, the man lowered his head and appeared on the camera screen. It was indeed Anna's missing husband. But in the very next second, while the woman was cooking in the kitchen, she didn't notice that her son had already wandered off to play by the river alone. It wasn't until Mary finished cooking and called her son to eat that she realized he wasn't in the house. Panicking, Mary rushed outside to check. She called out a few times, but there was no response. Just as she was filled with confusion, she turned and noticed that the small iron gate leading to the river had somehow been left open. A terrible feeling surged through her. Filled with anxiety, Mary slowly walked toward the river, silently praying that she was just overthinking. But reality, can be cruel. When Mary reached the river, she immediately saw a toy doll floating on the water's surface. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, as guilt overwhelmed her. Her stepson's father, who was also her current husband, informed her that he wanted a divorce. Devastated by the loss and her husband's decision, Mary fell into despair, growing increasingly depressed day by day. Seeing her pain, her best friend suggested that she take a break on a remote island to ease her mind and also finish her final manuscript. Taking her friend's advice, Mary drove off to the island that very day. As soon as she stepped out of the car, she was instantly captivated by the beauty of the scenery. The gloom she had felt before seemed to lift, and she thought, finally, I can find peace here and focus on my writing. But things didn't go as she had hoped. While she was sitting there brainstorming ideas, a familiar voice suddenly echoed from behind her. Mary slowly turned around in disbelief, only to be completely stunned by what she saw. Her son was standing at the doorway asking her, "Why didn't you take care of me?" She thought it was just a hallucination caused by her deep longing for him, so she brushed it off and didn't dwell on it. That night, however, Mary was abruptly awakened by a strange noise. Confused, she looked around, and to her shock, she saw her deceased son walking past the window. Unsure whether it was real or just another illusion, Mary didn't hesitate to follow him. When the boy turned around, she saw that it really was her son. Overcome with emotion, Mary rushed to embrace him. But just as she was about to speak to him, her son suddenly grabbed her and pulled her into the water. Mary jolted awake, realizing it had all been a dream. But before she could catch her breath, she felt something behind her. Something was watching her, intently. The woman's son had tragically drowned, and to help herself recover from the grief, she decided to drive alone to a remote island for some peace. However, strange events soon began to unfold. One day, while Mary was wandering around the island, she noticed an old woman sitting outside a house. The woman said something strange, claiming that Mary's son was waiting for her on the swing behind her. Mary was bewildered by these words. Just as she was about to ask more questions, the old woman hurriedly got up and left. Staring at the swing, which was still gently swaying, Mary began to wonder if the nightmares she'd been having lately might actually be real. When she returned to her place, Mary started going through her son's belongings, the only things she had left to remember him by. But as she picked up a drawing pad, something eerie happened. The drawing suddenly transformed into a message. It read, "Don't forget to look behind you." Startled, Mary quickly turned around, but saw only her reflection. Relieved that it was just a false alarm, she tried to calm herself down. The next morning, in an attempt to ease her anxiety, Mary took a small boat out to a nearby lighthouse. While she was setting up to take some scenic photos, a man suddenly appeared in front of her. After a brief conversation, she learned that his name was Jack, and he was the lighthouse keeper. Perhaps because he hadn't seen visitors in a long time, Jack warmly offered to show Mary around. The first day passed peacefully. But things took a dark turn when Mary returned home that evening. She opened the fridge to grab something to eat, and when she closed the door, she noticed something chilling. The previously scattered magnets on the fridge had rearranged themselves into the words, "Watch your back." At this point, Mary couldn't hold it together anymore. Panicked, she rushed to the lighthouse where Jack worked and shared all the strange things that had been happening to her. Seeing how distraught she was, Jack did his best to comfort her. The next day, when Mary returned to the town, it seemed like a festival was taking place. She asked one of the locals whether Jack had come to join the festivities, but her question left everyone in shock. When Mary described Jack's appearance in detail, one of the women from the town told her that it was impossible for him to be there. Jack had died 7 years ago.